It is by the collective that we are wounded, so it is by the collective we must heal. I have not met anyone so far that has had a trauma that hasn't had it impact either and both their sense of self and their sense of self in the world or with others. And so there's something different. I can go to a therapist, which I'm a big fan of therapy. I'm biased. I am a therapist, but I can go into an office and pay someone for their concerned gaze and come out feeling better because I have been seen and heard. But there's something that happens beyond that in the collective experience of a group that we didn't pay any of these people to love on you. And yet somehow, if I am brave enough to say the things that I have left unspoken but need to be said, and I still get received on the other end of that truth, there is something about that healing that goes to the core and plays out for the rest of my life.
Welcome to the Faithful and True podcast. We are happy again today to have with us Kristine and Lizzy from OnSite, good friends of ours, partners, as Greg put it last time, in the world of counseling and helping people who are experiencing trauma on a variety of different levels. Greg, great to have you back as always as our host. And we also have, this is the first time we've had two clinical directors because Jim Farm is our clinical director. I call him that all the time. And Kristine is the clinical director for OnSite. So welcome back, everybody, to podcast number 2.
And it is great. Thanks for being willing to give your time for us to continue our conversation. And for those that joined us last time, we talked about the role of trauma and the work that OnSite does specifically around trauma. And one of the things that we talked about was this idea of experiential therapy or experiential care. And so whoever would like to just describe, how do you define experiential care and what do you see as the value behind it?
One I want to put out, it's not experimental. It is experiential.
Experiential.
You didn't say experimental, but so many times I bring this term up and they're like, experimental. And I'm like, no, we're not experimenting. This is a tried and true. And I can give the layman's term, and then Kristine can go a little more clinical on us. But it is a very action-oriented form of therapy where you're not just sitting in a room talking about the issues. You're up, moving around, getting access to your body, dropping from your head to your heart, really seeing whatever you need to see so you can start to move through healing. And we do that in a number of different ways. I mean, sometimes I'm very mindful in speaking with clients about this because it can sound scary, but the way we do it and the safety we create around it is so powerful and healing. But it can look like, creating, like doing some role play, setting some scenes, utilizing group members or other people to help you start to look at what, if your family of origin was something you want to start to explore, setting that up so you can get a really good view of like, where did I fit into my family of origin, how I see it. It's my perspective, but how did I feel? And then setting into that space and feeling that space. It's just I love this group work and the experiential therapy. And I'm always, when I talk to people, I'm like, you've got to do the group. You've got to do the group because it is so powerful. Kristine?
Yeah, I will add on to that and I'll tag on to the group experience. So this is Kristine Jackson and honored to be here. The part that you say is so wonderful about group, Lizzy. Not only do I concur, but so does the godfather of our modality that we use a lot in our experiential. We use psychodramatic terms, and Moreno, who's the founder of that modality, said it is by the collective that we are wounded, so it is by the collective we must heal. And there is something about trauma. I have not met anyone so far that has had a trauma that hasn't had it impact either and both their sense of self and their sense of self in the world or with others. And so there's something different. I can go to a therapist, which I'm a big fan of therapy. I'm biased. I am a therapist, but I can go into an office and pay someone for their concerned gaze and come out feeling better because I have been seen and heard. but there's something that happens beyond that in the collective experience of a group that we didn't pay any of these people to love on you. And yet somehow, if I am brave enough to say the things that I have left unspoken but need to be said, and I still get received on the other end of that truth, there is something about that healing that goes to the core and plays out for the rest of my life. And then one thing I'll add about experiential is that obviously I'm a big fan, and it's a big umbrella. So we have experiential includes modalities like somatic experiencing, equine, play therapy, EMDR. And so there is when we use the term at OnSite, we're most often talking about experiential in a psychodramatic sense, or doing what Lizzy was talking about. But we also have goats and dogs and horses and different ways to have an experience, because in motion, my body probably knows something more than when I am still. And I know I'm a fairly smart person, not the smartest tool in the shed, but I can outthink or outthunk myself from anything or justify my own bad actions. And that's just my prefrontal cortex, my thinking brain going revving. But typically, because trauma hits deeper and there is often an impact in the emotional center of the brain, so does the healing need to go deeper than my thinking.
One of the phrases that we hear is this idea that the body always remembers. And so when we experience pain, when we experience hurt, when we experience trauma, it resides in us. And one of the great things about experiential therapy is it moves us and kind of loosens. I like the idea of the log jam. And sometimes we need that initial movement. And sometimes it can be a simple shift of one log. Sometimes the log jam is significant enough you kind of have to blow up the front and get it moving again. But it is important that we recognize that physical movement engages our body in new ways, which connects us emotionally. And I full disclosure, I'm a huge fan of experiential therapy. It was the primary modality that was used in the therapy that I went to in my own recovery. Didn't even know what it was, literally stumbled into it, and then began to see how transformative it was. And so, we talk about the fact that we partner with OnSite, and for many men that have been going to talk therapy for a while that are making progress, but there does seem to be a log jam. They're just not really getting connected to their physical selves. They're not really getting connected to their emotional selves. Then sending them to, or encouraging them, we don't send anybody, encouraging someone to go to OnSite is one of the ways that we're going to support them as maybe they get connected to how their pain resides and who they are physically.
Appreciate that. I think there is so much to offer in the world of therapy. And I'd love to hear from Jim, your clinical director, about how you use experiential therapy.
Yeah, I mean, we do it in multiple ways. We have, for example, you've probably heard the open chair technique. Well, I'll use that from time to time with guys. At the workshop, we have a technique, Greg, that you maybe can explain a little bit in terms of like the 3 chairs, that we use. For couples work, we use the hula hoop analogy where we get people moving within the hula hoops, and each hula hoop kind of represents, 2 of them represent, the 2 individuals of the couple, and then we have this, the third hula hoop that represents the relationship. And so there's ways, our listeners might be more familiar with those things in regards to, but the 3 chair technique, Greg, maybe you can explain that a little bit.
Before I do that, one of the ways that is really very simple, but I see incredibly meaningful that helps people shift. Because of the exposure that Mark Laaser had to Virginia Satir, a lot of the work that we do is in alignment with Virginia Satir, and she has her stances. And so one of the things that we do at the couples workshop is we allow people to move and to get in each of those stances. So to get in the placator, to get in the blame, to get in the super reasonable, to get in the withdrawal. And it is fascinating to me how watching couples just get into those stances, something in them identifies with one of them. Many times a couple can feel a shift And then when we move them into that congruent stance and then speak truth to them, it literally, you can see by being in that congruent stance, you're able to receive the truth that we are speaking. So it doesn't necessarily have to be this significant, dramatic experience, but just allowing ourselves to move a little bit can really be very powerful. And the thing that Jim is referring to is here at Faithful and True, we refer to the 3 chairs, the wise adult chair, the survivor chair, the little boy or little girl chair, or the child chair. We know that a lot of people use that, but helping people to understand that what chair I'm sitting in not just informs the voice that I'm listening to, but it actually informs the perspective in which I see things. And so that could be a simple way that we use experiential work.
I appreciate that.
And I know that a part of OnSite is Equine Therapy. That's a very experiential thing. We had someone on previously our podcast that is involved in equine therapy. What do you see as something like that? You mentioned goats. Engaging animals, how does that serve someone in their own journey?
Oh man, I like animals. We'll just say that. I'm not like a huge animal lover. I don't own animals, or I guess you don't own animals. I don't have animals. I don't want to pick up after animals. I'm just being completely transparent. But to get in front of a large horse, or even something that can engage with you but doesn't have words and just matches energy. And I'm sure you guys talked about the equine therapy. So I'm a very passive person. I don't have like I'd like to be more assertive, but I don't. So when I get around a horse or an animal, they override me immediately. Like there's just they either dismiss me or override me. And so another pivotal moment in my journey is like having to take control of a horse, and own that. And so we, especially with couples too, so you put a couple in front of a horse and that dynamic of their energy and how the horse responds, because they don't even see, it's just so powerful. So that's just a little personal experience. Kristine, what do you?
Yeah, I appreciate that. And from the clinical side about the why or the neuroscience behind it, we all have a capacity for mirror neurons. And so we can feel and know what we cannot speak. And there's something about the experiences, Lizzy described it as when I'm out in the field and I take a couple out, for instance, to a horse, their pattern shows up, and they're not in the vying place of trying to have one therapist see it their way or manipulate. What does Esther Perel say? That we take our partner into couples counseling and bring them up to the therapist and say, see, Tom, how they're doing this wrong. And a horse is not going to speak back to that, but is going to speak into the pattern that becomes very visible because there's an energy around it. And talk about that log jam analogy. All of a sudden, when I can see in 3D my pattern or my log jam, then all of a sudden I also have the capacity to walk around it, to see it differently, to see if I can enter it to create change at a different point or perspective than I have in the past. And that's powerful.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Do you find that when people show up at OnSite, maybe they have had some communication about what to expect, like how do people respond? Is there a resistance, like, no, I'm not going to go near that horse? Or is there like this openness of, wow, that sounds amazing? And when you first invite people maybe to do some sculpting, like what gets stirred up in people even in their process of engaging this?
I think what gets stirred up is what gets to be the work sometimes. So we don't ignore that either. We also don't force anyone to do anything that they're not ready or willing to do. So if there is a person that there's an unresolved past trauma or fear that they don't want to be near a horse, well, goats are a lot smaller, and we got even smaller dogs and even smaller cats. So we can go right side, and a pig. Yeah. So I think there's something about just linking arms with the person and saying, okay, let's talk that through. And then what do you want to do?
Mm-hmm.
And we have lots of different ways. We have adjuncts that work with the chi of the body. We have body workers. We have a therapist who does fighting sticks in a non-traditional way that is like an EMDR tapping experience for whole body release. We have art therapy, music therapy. So if there is someone who wants to come and rears back like a horse at the idea of a horse, then we've got a different way that we can connect with them.
And I think, sorry.
Oh, no, go ahead, Lizzy.
I think that's what we love about experiential therapy is there is so much variety. Everybody listens or hears differently, processes differently. And so we have an entire tool suitcase, literally sometimes, to start to provide options for clients and participants to figure out what's going to work for them. You don't like horses? Let's go climb this, climbing wall and see what that brings up.
Mm-hmm.
You don't like you can't do physical movement. Well, we've got this body energy person that can just sit with you in stillness. So, and then of course, everything else that happens with the scarves and it's just so it's hard not to get people bought in when you find what's going to really resonate and work for them.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and I would even affirm that idea that you said, how I respond is part of the process.
Mm-hmm.
That whatever that invitation is, how I respond to that invitation brings some clarity to who I am or to my story or to my experience, if I want to tune into that and pay attention to that.
Absolutely. And I love what you say. It's the paying attention. And I think that's part of the gift of places like OnSite, where it's not a 50-minute session where you're out the door. It's a walking a person through a day, a week, and a few days, almost a week. And so for me, when I first went to OnSite, I was so scared. I went straight to a professional workshop because God forbid I needed to do my own work. And then I learned I really needed to do my own work. And so I came back as a participant. But I remember just shaking and going, oh no. As I began to realize the things that I slowed down enough that caught up to me around, it was almost like, and then all my stuff came up. I began to say, wow, in equal components, what happens if nothing changes? Because I'm not satisfied with the life that I am surviving, but not really living. And then the other part of me was saying, oh my gosh, what if I have to change everything? What if I peel this thing down to the nubbins and it turns out there's nothing left? And I have heard that a lot from clients. And I think one of the things I appreciate most about OnSite is that I too have to be a client there before being a professional there. So we have a phrase that you cannot take a client deeper than you're willing to go yourself. And all of our staff as therapists have to go through the experience and sit in the seat and have the fears and the invitation that leads to the resistance to maybe the awareness first. And so I think that engenders a true compassion for the bravery that it takes to go and do some of the work wherever that work lands you. And I appreciate our CEO, Mazad Cox, often says, it is not what's wrong with you, it is what's right with you, that you're willing to take the time, do the work, and live differently coming out of here, whatever you're willing to fully embrace and express.
Well, and I want to touch on that idea of the importance of setting aside significant time. We do a 3-day workshop, and we often get the question of, do I really need 3 days? Or the other end of it is, what difference is 3 days going to make? But, I use this image of remodeling your bathroom. If you need to remodel your bathroom, you can work on it every week for an hour, and you are going to make some progress, but probably you're going to get discouraged. But if you set aside a weekend and say, just for a weekend, I'm going to work on my bathroom, I'm not going to get finished, but I'm going to have more clarity, and I am going to make enough progress that there's hope. And so whether it's a week long or several days, there is something significant about, for these days, I'm just focusing on this part of who I am and developing understanding and engaging my journey, knowing whatever I have at the end of this experience, I can take into the rest of my life.
I'm going to borrow that analogy. A number of reasons. One, that was a perfect explanation when I'm explaining to people why to take this time. And then the other is I need to renovate my bathroom.
Yeah.
Well, and Jim can tell us all about renovating a bathroom.
Yes, I've put up with that for the last 6 months. So
You were on the 6-month plan.
yeah. Well, I can just speak to, my experience at OnSite through the training, but also my wife was down there, and I think you guys do a really good job for anybody that's kind of fearful or feeling vulnerable about doing experiential therapy. You guys do a really good job about creating safety, that allows someone to kind of take that risk and maybe try a different type of therapy that, that might feel awkward at first. I remember when I was in grad school and getting introduced to this experiential therapy, and I was never in drama or, art or playing and those types of things in high school. And I was like, this is just weird. I don't want to do this, but there's something powerful about, actually experiencing, a past event, but in a different way, right? It's creating those new brain associations with the past experience through these new experiences. And so I just really found that to be powerful. But that just kind of speaking from my own experience of really being reluctant and anxious about, being able to, do something that just felt awkward at first, but you guys do a really good job about creating that safety on the front end of it. So for people that are maybe like me in grad school, or was like, this is a little weird, this is awkward, you guys do a really good job with creating that space to be able to enter into that.
Thank you. I think, again, that's where the group comes in too, because I'm not alone. I'm not sitting on the high dive all by myself. I am ready with a team of people who are like, yeah, maybe a little bit weird. And the only rule that we have in experiential is that it is by invitation only. So truly, there is a saying that we have at OnSite that 70% of some of the healing happens through the witness perspective. So oftentimes people think you have to have done theater, like you're saying, Jim, in order to be successful at an expressive sort of modality such as experiential. And that's not the case. You get to bring you, however you are, wherever you are, into the space. And then there's a space for you, whether it's sitting back and watching. It's almost as if I can go to a movie theater and I can see the lights go down. Remember when we had movie theaters and lights went down? And all of the things happen. And all of a sudden, if I see something play out that evokes something within me, I'm boo-hooing or laughing hysterically. And in my day-to-day, lights come up, I go around the world. I don't have the fullest expression of that emotion always at my capacity. It's something about the safety of here, I'm seeing it, but I no longer feel like I'm in it, which is part of that trauma or neural reconstruction of what you were talking about, the new pathways around an old experience, because now I get to, in safety, experience it. If I'm going to an action movie, I feel safe in my seat, not being part of the action. So then I can feel all the feelings.
Yeah, that's really good.
I think that safety piece is huge, because where there is safety, there can be vulnerability. And in order for there to be healing, there must be vulnerability. And so, I have had some more difficult experiences with experiential therapy where it was less of a gentle invitation and it was more of a push. And I intuitively knew that something was off in this, and that there needed to be more of that invitation to participate rather than something being imposed on you. And so to create that safe space where people can observe, decide for themselves, engage to the extent that they are able and ready, I think really is foundational for the power of the experiential therapy itself. One other thing that we've alluded to, but I just want to say clearly is, and part of the experiential benefit is not only do I experience my own work, but I experience other people's work. I have sent many men to OnSite that I work with, and the report that I get back is, yes, the work that they did was significant, but it was that invitation to be a part of somebody else's work, or simply the observing of somebody else's work, that really was transformational, because like you've identified, that observer space created enough safety to increase my vulnerability so that I could receive something because I was less guarded about it, because it wasn't mine, it was somebody else's.
That's so well said. And so I appreciate you giving it that clarity. And I also appreciate that in the previous podcast, you talked a bit about how invasion or abandonment is often one of the first formative traumas that people have had. So far be it from me or us to invade yet again into, and particularly people who have, that often means that there's some boundary that has been crossed. So if your no is not a no, and I'm not respecting that, then I'm probably going towards the invasion spot and re-traumatizing a part of you that needs to know that your voice matters and is true and is heard.
Mm-hmm. You know, one thing that we talk about addiction, this idea of your no. So addiction is when I've lost my yes and my no, that I can't say yes to the things that bring life, and I can't say no to the things that rob me of life. And so that therapeutic partnering where we respect and welcome somebody's yes and no is really an important part of their recovery journey. And sometimes we have to model it before they can even discover it within themselves.
Yes.
So Jim, having been there, is there any other thing that you would want someone to know about just engaging the experiential part of OnSite if they do have some hesitancy?
Yeah. You know, when I got down there, you know, this one word that just kept going through my mind was just surrendering to the process, you know, and just, you know, letting go of any you know, things that were wanting to hold me back, and just recognizing, hey, this is a safe place, and I can just surrender to the expertise of the people that I was working with down there. And it is safe, you know, to be able to do that. And so I guess that's the main thing that goes through my mind, is just, you know, willingness to surrender to this process.
Well,
you know?
and what's significant is surrendering to the process is not giving up myself.
That's right.
And in fact, if I don't hold on to myself, I can't surrender to the process. And so it's like we said, it's still having my yes, my no, but engaging and kind of stepping further than I thought was possible.
Yeah.
So Lizzy and Kristine, is there anything else that you would add for someone that might be considering coming to OnSite, what their process might look like, and how they can pursue that?
Yeah, I think just knowing that OnSite's number one on OnSite's mind is safety and containment. And so that is what we're going to lead with. That was what we're going to focus with. I think Kristine said earlier, there's not resistance, there's lack of warm up, and warm up to us is that safety and making sure people feel ready to jump in. And so, and there's a lot of upfront prep as far as conversation, making sure you understand, some paperwork that can also aid in that warm up. So you can you're ready to know what you're going to do, and also helping identify which program. So you'll feel ready to do that.
Okay.
And I would just add, the worst that's going to happen is that you're going to get loved on.
Mm-hmm.
and I know that's a weird phrase to use on an experience, but it is so often the experience that people tell me about, is that I had no idea, you know, I was getting ready to do the hard work. I had no idea that I would come away feeling so loved.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay. So if I want to reach out, what's the website? I know that y'all are located outside of Nashville, Tennessee. Mm-hmm. But if I want more information, where can I go for that information?
Our website's a great space. It's onsiteworkshops.com. OnSite spelled ONSITE. Workshops is plural. You can tell I've done this a lot. And you're welcome to go to our website, fill in an inquiry form. There's a lot of videos. You're welcome to call me directly at any point. I'm on the website as well. And I'm happy to start talking about how we can support.
And may I also plug that we're not just in Nashville anymore?
Oh, that's right. Oh, yeah.
Yes. I was going to say, aren't you in California too?
Yes. Yes. We are outside of San Diego, and by about 45 minutes from the airport, inland to the San Diego airport, and in a gorgeous setting. So both settings are created for your ultimate healing of 250 plus acres, including the occasional animal and a great scenery and a place to heal.
Sounds awesome.
And not have to cook.
Yeah. Well, Lizzy and Kristine, we can't thank you enough for joining us for 2 podcasts and sharing all of your insight on on treating trauma, how you treat your clients, and it just sounds like a warm and inviting and transformative experience for people. So thanks for joining us on the Faithful and True podcast. To our listeners and our viewers, thanks for joining us on these 2 podcasts where we featured on-site workshops. We encourage you to look into it, to visit onsiteworkshops.com. And until we join you again next week, we hope that this coming week for you will be a week filled with many blessings and great vision.